Hello and welcome in. I am Greg Smith, recruiting extraordinaire for Hail Varsity, and we are back with a special edition here on the YouTube channel. I'm joined by Steve Marik, staff writer, also of Hail Varsity, to talk a new Nebraska commitment. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing great. Riley Van Poppel, 6'5", 270 pounder, defensive lineman from Argyle, Texas. He pulled the trigger today. Greg, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess my initial thing, and you mentioned he took the visit to Nebraska over the weekend. My first thought really is that Nebraska has done a very nice job when it comes to these official visits and kind of maximizing these visits. And I've written about this a couple of times about what happened last year in the recruiting cycle with the summer official visits. And if you go back and look at who visited and who committed where, I think Nebraska only got a handful, maybe 2 or 3 new commitments period out of that group. They're already up to a couple and tracking for at least a couple more that have already visited, and we're only halfway through the month, and they're probably going to have another, I don't know, 10 to 15 official visitors still to come in the rest of the month. So I guess my first thought was Nebraska back in the saddle when it comes to official visits under this staff.
And chalk this up for another win for Brian Applewhite in the state of Texas, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's an important thing with Nebraska and Texas and Brian Applewhite for a couple of reasons. We talked a lot about, and rightfully so, about Mickey Joseph and Bill Bush and the recruiting prowess that they would bring to this staff when they came on, right? Like those were the headline things to talk about with those two guys, and they earned that with their reputations. But I think that part of the reason that Brian Applewhite flew a little bit under the radar in that regard is because we just didn't know as much about him. Like, he just wasn't as a household of a name around these parts for Nebraska fans especially, but just had not coached in the Big Ten, had not been at Nebraska previously. So it made sense, right? Where those guys had been. But what you come to find out, and it almost kind of came out immediately in talking to people about Applewhite, was that he's really, really well respected in the state of Texas. Like, he's obviously been down there for years. He's got really good relationships and ties to those high schools down there. And I think it was the very first roundtable that we talked to him at, I actually asked him about the importance of being able to get back into Texas. And he said, first of all, Nebraska needs to be able to go recruit anywhere, but Texas has a lot of good high school football players, and we want to go get some of those guys too. And here they are with the Texas defensive lineman and Riley Van Poppel.
For sure. And watching Riley's tape, his huddle film, really athletic kid, 6'5", 270 pounder. They played him on offense as well as defense. Offensively, he was even playing tight end and H-back. They're throwing him a little bit of passes, but mostly used as a blocker. But just a really interesting prospect, I think. It might be a couple of years before he can see the field, just so he develops his body, just to get it Big Ten ready. But we were doing a little bit of research before this, and the 2017 class, Damian Daniels, we're thinking that Riley is the first Texas defensive lineman from Damian Daniels to sign with the Huskers.
Yeah, it's a long time for a defensive lineman, and there have not been that many Texans. It feels like there's been like 1 or 2 maybe a cycle, so it's not been as much of a dry spell in Texas overall as I think that people might feel like, because it definitely feels like people believe that Nebraska has not really recruited Texas, but they have. It just hasn't been as hard and as many offers as maybe have gone out, especially in Georgia and Florida, as those states have kind of come to the forefront. But it was surprising that he's the first defensive lineman since Damian Daniels in the 2017 class. A couple years after that, Brant Banks is kind of in a weird spot, right? Because he was recruited as both by schools. They didn't know. He almost was taken at Nebraska as a jumbo athlete because he got moved to offensive line pretty quickly once he got to Nebraska. I'm not sure how much he practiced on the defensive line, but he moved over there to the offensive side pretty quickly, and that's where he spent all of the rest of his career, except for when he took that turn playing basketball and that great story. But it's a really good thing for Nebraska to continue to get back into Texas. And you already see, and it's funny that when Riley Van Poppel committed, one of the things you saw on Twitter was other guys in Texas, recruits that the Huskers are after, retweeting him and saying, hey, that's awesome. And guys that have even visited Nebraska, like another defensive end, Trey Wilson, who's a high 4-star kid out of that same area in Texas. When you start to get the attention of those guys, that's a really good thing for Nebraska. I think think it's a really good pickup for the Huskers. Like you said, I like his athleticism on film. I like that he's the first defensive lineman in this class. And I wrote this yesterday, and it just so happened that this happened today, is that I think the defensive line is now, to me, the biggest question mark for the Huskers in this recruiting class, because to me, they've got to get a few guys that you feel really good about the team being able to develop. It doesn't have to be guys that can come in and start day one, but you have to feel good about their upside. And I think Van Poppel definitely fits into that category.
I completely agree. Just in watching his, once he gets here and works on his body and develops, gets the coaching, I think Nebraska is going to have a really solid option with Riley Van Poppel on the defensive line.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you want, right? When it comes to the lines of scrimmage, especially coming to play in the Big Ten, it's just so rare where you're going to have a guy on the defensive line come in. I think it's hard on the defensive. I think that's the hardest position to come in and play right away. I think it's harder than offensive line, and we've kind of seen that, to be honest, over the years here, where we've seen a couple of young offensive linemen recently here at Nebraska that were higher rated. Teddy Prohaska, Turner Corcoran, Bryce Benhart played early as well. Like, you've been able to see that, but boy, it's tough to see that with defensive linemen. And it's just between going into facing guys that are, grown men, 22 years old, facing off against those guys, to learning to play with technique. I always think of kind of Ty Robinson in this way. As Ty played early, as he's kind of the exception to the rule here on this, but we still hear about Ty being able to learn how to play with his hands and use his technique to match up with his physical skills. It just takes time when it comes to that defensive line.
Yeah. Listening to Eric Shenander talk about the progression of Ty Robinson's career here has been kind of interesting to listen to. Just, you like to look at Ty Robinson and say like, oh, he's an older guy now, but he's really not. He just played really super young here. Yeah. So he just continues to get better. And I think, Riley Van Poppel could look at a guy like Ty Robinson and kind of like see himself, I think, of is kind of a similar player and career trajectory type. So.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too, because I'm glad you mentioned that, because Riley is a guy, he's higher rated, I think, than people realize. Like, he's a 4-star prospect by most services. And he's, I think, the highest rated defensive lineman right now that the Huskers have gotten a verbal commitment from since Ty Robinson, right? And so I think that he's gone a little bit under the radar just because there's been so much talk about so many different recruits this month. And there's been a lot of really good prospects that have come through and more to come, that I think Riley goes under the radar. But he really had a good impression of Nebraska going back to his time when he came out for a spring visit. Really liked his time with Mike Dawson. He had told me about that. He loves his relationship with Eric Shenander, defensive coordinator, as well. And so I think Nebraska got a good one. We'll see what else they can get out of that weekend as well, because I think what's happening is that you're starting to create some good competition for these spots. I think Nebraska is in a really good position with a handful of positions, and then we'll kind of see how things shake out around that. But Nebraska is tracking for a really nice class right now.
Yep, for sure. And I think Riley has got to be the top rated recruit in the 2023 class right now. So just a really good get for the Huskers.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, make sure you guys are liking this video. Subscribe to the Hail Varsity YouTube channel if you aren't. Also, make sure you tell a friend if you've got a friend that has not subscribed to the Hail Varsity YouTube channel yet. Also, subscribe to hailvarsity.com. Make sure you check out all of the premium content over there, as well as the magazine. You want to make sure that you look on the lookout for the Hail Varsity 2022 football yearbook that's coming soon to newsstands, and we will catch you guys next time.